Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today's guest is Dr. Leslie Dunner. Leslie Dunner is a conductor, a composer, and an educator, and we're going to be very thrilled to speak with him today about his recent work and some of the historic things that he's done and some of the really significant things that he's done with various companies, opera and dance companies around the world. Hello, Dr. Leslie Dunner.
Real pleasure to see you, Miss Carolyn.
So I'm happy to see you. So what's been going on? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Oh my God.
We're in a
Like,
pandemic. I'm up in Interlochen, Michigan. We are in full swing with students in school, but we also teach remotely. So, for example, in many of my classes, I have our students that are here. I have my students in China, my students in Korea, my students in South Africa, and my students in various places in the country where they have not yet been able to come to.
China. Other so
That's
how
a
do you
problem
navigate
because
time difference?
Well, that's one of the issues. One of my classes, I have a student, because I have class at 4 p.m., it's 4 a.m. for him.
Oh
He did
God.
show up for the exam on Friday. And he said, when I said, I'm sending it to you, he said, you already have it in Canvas. I took the exam. I said, go to bed then.
Oh my goodness, these kids, they're going to have stories to tell
Yes, they
when they're
will.
writing their biographies because you're working with some of the up and coming musicians of the world up at
Yes.
Interlaken.
Uh,
And my I say my computer, I have a name for it, like we name cars sometimes. So my computer is old Betsy because she is old. She's oh that's the wrong. Let me find the input. There we go.
I can share my other
She
screen
is
here.
old and
Well,
still kicking.
I have to use more than one because one machine does not do all of the different technology that I need for class.
Yeah, and I find I'm teaching as well downtown, and it's very different when you're teaching remotely and you have to use the technology and try to monitor what's going on in class. So what I find, and we're going to stop talking about teaching for a minute after a while, but what I find is some will get online and then they will ghost you. You know what
Hmm.
that mean? You know what I mean when I say that?
Hmm.
So they will. Oh, for some reason my headphones still aren't working. They will ghost you because they'll log on and then they'll disappear.
Hmm.
So this happened the other day, and I was calling, I was calling the student's name, and I said, "Going once." Oop, I just. I'm sorry. Going twice, and then I just removed them from the room.
Hmm.
You know, bless their hearts.
Yeah. Well, I had the last spring when all of this started for me. I had my student in India, and they are at an 8.5 hour difference.
Oh my God.
And I still had China, I still had South Africa, I still had Korea, I had my student up in Canada, etc. My student in Colombia, my student in Costa Rica, but the one in India, he would start with the light on and then immediately turn it off, and there would be no sound. As you're talking on, are you there? And he'd say, well, I'm kind of finishing dessert because I finished dinner and I'm now in my pajamas. Do you mind if I don't have the screen on?
But they're cute, aren't they? I mean, you can't let on that you are enjoying these moments, like when the little niece or something sticks their head into the screen, or the dad's passing behind in the back and just waves, and so you just take it all in. But at a certain point, and they're adults, you're dealing with younger people, so it's a different kind of
Right, right.
approach. But I think one of the things that we have to do
Hmm.
is to inculcate in them ownership and responsibility of their education, you
Yes.
know. And some of them are absolute joy, and some of them you can see them struggling because we know that struggle, don't we?
Yes,
We
we
know
do.
that struggle, whether it's financial or it's just socially trying to figure out how am I going to get through this world, especially if we don't have like a rich endowment fund.
Hmm.
So and trying to be a musician or a scholar or both, can be challenging, and especially in these times of the pandemic. I think the one thing that we can do is to offer them as role models, uh, say to them, use all the resources that are available to you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Because I think we've been socialized to grow up and not, I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps. That's a bunch of hoo-wah. I was going to say something else. Filters on,
But
and but you understand what I'm saying? Is that's the hard part. Now I'm still getting some echo here, and I don't understand why that is. But can you just say hello, Carolyn?
hello, Carolyn.
Okay, good. So that's working. I'm just going to raise my volume a little bit.
Right.
So let's just jump into it. Now, I first met you. No, well, let me put it this way. I first saw you at Tanglewood.
Right.
You were living on the hill with the gods. Was it called
I was
Saranac?
actually, well, Saranac, but I wasn't living with everybody else. I was actually living across the state line. I was living in Pittsfield, New York, going back and forth every day.
There's a Pittsfield, New York. I thought it was only Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Yes, Pittsfield, New York is contiguous to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, ironically.
Oh, well, I was at Miss Hill's school,
Aha.
Miss Hall's school.
Mhm.
I never know there was such a place, but
Neither did anybody else.
but Leslie, I remember seeing. I was like, "Ooh, there's a black person," and I didn't know you, and I don't even think that we actually spoke during
We
that
had
summer.
no,
You
we
know,
hadn't.
but for those of you that aren't familiar with Tanglewood, it's a beautiful area up in Massachusetts, um, where the Boston Symphony goes for its summer session. And back in the day, for the opening ceremony, all the girls had to wear white dresses. And we would sing the Randall Thompson Alleluia to begin the season. You would have coachings, you would have Phyllis Curtin was there for the vocal program, Gunther Schuler was there for the orchestral program.
Yes.
And who was there that summer? Didn't they do a Verdi Requiem, if I recall?
They did a Verdi Requiem. The main teachers there were Leonard Bernstein, Seiji Ozawa, Gustav Meyer, and Maurice Abravanel, who founded the orchestra, the Salt Lake Salt Lake City Symphony, which ultimately became the Utah Symphony.
That's a very star-studded faculty, and
Yes.
so for you to be chosen for that, just talk about the process for those that are aspiring conductors.
Well, there is a process of applications of upwards of many hundreds from all over the world. They take two fellows and four, um, what do they call them? Fellows, and they're not orders because you do participate. I can't remember what they're called, adjuncts.
Hmm.
And that year was the first time that they had a student who was between those two because they had already filled the slots for the two fellows. And I was the one student who was between the two. So I got to conduct the way the fellows got to conduct, but also had the other classes the way that the adjuncts had.
Hmm.
And to give you an idea of the level of the adjuncts, we would have theory exams. And there is a 20th century technique of atonal music called modus novus. And the first class,
wake
in,
wake me up when you finish that, okay?
in the first class, the teacher plays one of the examples from the book, right? And you're supposed to identify which one it is. And then he had us just listen and write it all down. And then he said, "This class is too good." Because there are a total of five of us, right? He says, "This class is too good. I'm going to do two excerpts at the same time from different pages." And so he plays the two excerpts, and they're both atonal, they're both 12 tone, right? And so he plays the two. And he said, "You must tell me which two they are." And immediately one of the Chinese students raised his hand and says, "Excuse me, teacher, you make mistake." And the teacher said, "No, you don't understand. This is what you have to look at, one on one page and one on another page and combine the two pages to get what I'm doing." He says, "No, you change third finger, fourth note on left hand, and then be on page."
Oh my God. Who was the
And the
student?
teacher looked down and said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And then we had
Oh,
our solfege where you have to do do re mi fa sol la, singing a melody.
yeah.
Was William Tell, you know.
Oh God.
And it was the middle section. And this guy's going, so me also in Italian. I lost him after the first measure. This was
Well,
the class.
that's why you all were with the gods in Saranac, and the lowly voice fellows were at Miss Hall's school. And we had coachings, which were great. We had, it was just a magical place. I wish I could have gone back.
Yes.
When you think about things, when you're in the middle of them, you don't realize how significant and important they are. But we didn't meet there. I think I just saw you crossing the grounds. I was like, "Ooh, you know,
My
I
brother.
I don't miss an opportunity to see something good looking walking across the field there. Okay. So, and then I got this call. You were in Minneapolis
Mhm.
for the Minneapolis Composers Forum, but we don't have to talk about that. I want to talk about your conducting. So from Tanglewood, you were already conducting by then. You
I
just
was there
entered the
doing my
program.
doctoral program at Cincinnati Conservatory.
Cincinnati, my hometown. I hope
And
they
your
treated
alma
you well.
mater.
Yes, that's true. I just hope they treated you well.
Um,
We'll pass over that. So,
there are stories there too.
oh, we all have stories, honey. Oh my God. But I want to save those for Halloween. So maybe you can come back for Halloween and we'll
Ghosts,
we'll
yes.
talk about horror stories. Less Cincinnati than other places, though. I love Cincinnati, my hometown. Starting the prep school there, preparatory department of the conservatory. Um, let's talk about your conducting, though. So you were in the conducting program in Cincinnati,
Mhm.
but that wasn't your first beginnings in music. You were a clarinetist,
Right.
right?
My undergraduate degree was in clarinet.
Why did you pick clarinet? I'm just curious.
When I left elementary school to go to junior high school, the school I went to was an old Jewish school. I was part of that first wave of busing in New York back in the
Hmm.
60s when they were doing integration. And the school did testing for lots of things. They said I tested well for science, I tested well for math, I tested well for visual arts, and I tested well for music, so I could take advanced courses in junior high school. And I
Wow.
needed to pick an instrument. And I remembered that they had a group come through, and there was a guy who kept doing things with his instrument, and I wanted to find out what he was doing. So I chose that instrument. It was clarinet. He was always trying to adjust his reed. I hate that guy now. Nightmare.
Well, he put you on the path, though. He put
It
you
did.
on the path. So you're a product of New York City public schools, in other words.
And I will
And
tell you that when I started in junior high school to be in the class to play, the teacher said there was no more room in the class for me because, I was one of there were very few black students where I went to school. By the
Mhm.
time I was in junior high school, there were only two. And so I was not allowed to be in the class, but the teacher was called to the principal's office. And when the teacher left, I went in and added my name to the roll book. I'm serious. I added my name to the roll book. That's
you
how I started.
now, I hope none of your students hear this because you were a rebel, in other words.
Still am.
Yeah, but you became an engineer, if I recall.
Well, I went to
I'm trying to
college
remember
on
the
an engineering
narrative.
scholarship. Yes, I went on an optical engineering, geometrical laser energetics was my field when I went to
Wow.
college. I went on a scholarship.
Excellent. Now, how did the conducting come about? And then we want to jump to some of these international experiences that you had.
Well, while I was at Eastman, in that junior, once I switched from engineering to music, there was a whole litany of problems. But I managed to place out of all of the required courses through exams. I really good at taking tests.
Hmm.
And one of the things I wanted to do was to learn about all of the instruments and learn how it all works together. So I registered for a conducting class. And the conductor for that class happened to conduct the university orchestra where I had been playing because I was a university student in engineering. And the Eastman students used to make terrible fun of me. And when we had the final exam, Everyone conducted because the class is made up of Eastman students, so it's a good group.
Yeah.
And the teacher said at the end of my conducting, said, and he knew what was happening. He said, "You all make fun of him, but watch out. He's going to be the one who's hiring you for your job." And I never forgot that. I never forgot it. I left, conducting. I went into musicology and music theory, and then went back to conducting because I never forgot what he said.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Little,
he was right.
little gems that people put in your head. They put a little seed there that you're
Mm-hmm.
not even aware of, and it gets nurtured without your even knowing it.
Well, I get a feeling sometimes, Leslie, that they don't even know that it's, this is a theme that's probably going to run through all of my talks that I do with people, is that there's always this spiritual element at work.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, people, I don't know why I'm doing this, but here, let me, do this for you. Go talk to that person. You need some help, all that kind of stuff. And it just sometimes they don't know why they're doing it. It's just something comes on them that they should do it. And the result is usually dramatic
Mm-hmm.
and significant.
Life altering.
Yes, yes. So you heard this little message and you acted on it.
Well, I
So
did for years. I
yeah,
didn't for years, but and again, every time I tried getting a job, it was a disastrous outcome. So I kept trying to go back to school. I wanted to go to New England Conservatory, but I
hmm
couldn't afford it. So I applied 2 different years. And the second year I applied, I also applied to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati gave me a full ride. Now, when I interviewed there, the interview was horrendous with Maestro Samuel, who literally walked out of my interview. And I thought, this
I
is
have a little story too, but
my
let's
life.
save that. Let's save that for Halloween, okay?
But
Now,
when I did that, I decided to go there to
as
prove them wrong.
I'm gonna have a sip of coffee. My grandmother used to say, "Keep a smile on your face and your big mouth shut." My
Mhm.
filter is coming off, and I have to be very, very careful. So here's
Take it
what
to another system.
I'm going to lean in now. I'm going to lean in. So now I want you to tell me, just me, it's just me listening, and all the people who are going to be watching this. Tell me about your first professional conducting experience. Where was it?
Oh Lord, the first actual conducting experience. That was
Mhm.
not an audition, right? Not for
Yeah,
an
where
audition.
you got
Where I
paid.
got paid.
You got hired to conduct.
The first time was actually with the Detroit Symphony. It was the very first time I went and auditioned. The Dance Theater of Harlem had asked me to conduct a tour. Short version, I was teaching at Carleton College. I went overseas to do an international competition. I was the first American to ever win a prize in a competition. It was the Toscanini competition. I left
It's
school,
very prestigious.
very prestigious, and no American has done it since. And I started to work at Dance Theater of Harlem. But as soon as I got to New York, the job fell through. So I had no job because I had just left my teaching job for this job in New York.
Hmm
And I worked in the library. I had to find something to do, right, to earn some money. And then a tour came up. And so I was asked to do the tour. And just before I left for the tour, the Detroit Symphony called to ask if I would be interested in auditioning for a position with them as assistant. And I said yes because, you always say yes when somebody asks if you can do something because you're in your 20s. That's what you do.
Yeah.
And I came back and I thought, I can't do this. It's in 2 days. How am I going to prepare? Well, so I went expecting nothing. I literally went just for the fun of it. I didn't take clothes or anything, like to look good. It was just a lark. And after the first round, they invited me for the second round. And after the second round, they invited me to the third round. And I thought, holy crap, I might actually get a job. And so I'm lying down on the floor trying to, Nam Yoho Renge Kyo, because I had been practicing my Buddhism. And there's a
Yeah.
knock at the door, and the door flies open. And the artistic administrator says, they want you downstairs now. I said, it's not my turn. She said, they've changed the order. It's your turn now. You need to come down now. I said,
Don't you hate it when they do that?
oh, wait. So I'm there on the floor, right? Expecting to be alone. So now I'm angry. And so I go down there and I'm still angry. I have not learned how to let go.
Well, they've interrupted your piece.
Then they brought me up to the room and they said, well, we would like to offer you the job. What do you think of that? And I was still angry because now I'm standing in the middle of a circle and I don't know who to look at. There's no chair. I said, can I have a chair? And so they send out somebody to get a chair. And then the general manager says, well, what do you think of accepting the contract? And I said, on one condition. Now, mind you, I don't have a job.
What was the condition?
I said, I must have 16 to 20 weeks off, not counting vacation time at full pay for my outside work.
Know your worth and ask for it. I just had this conversation last weekend. Now, as I recall, and I will say this as a matter of disclosure to the public, Dr. Leslie B. Dunner, was hiring me when no one else would. And I couldn't get arrested in the United States, but he would hire me. And so on one occasion, we were doing chamber music in Detroit. I'm going to talk about your study process. When he studies scores, there's no sound around. It's all in his head. And I think I was humming or something in proximity. You're like, you have to be quiet. I was like, oh, sorry. But the thing about it is that during his tenure, and I would like you to speak about this, they started this program where they were having Black, African American, and possibly other people of color, essentially African American composers, and they would send their scores. And can you just talk about that and the process that you had to go through and then eventually get them from someone submitting a score to it actually being played by the Detroit Symphony, which is very prestigious?
Right. We started that program during my tenure. I was approached by the general manager to talk about the concept, and I thought it was a very good idea. And so we flushed it out ultimately. And they started also a fellowship program to develop instrumentalists, and a number of players have come through that and have gone on to professional jobs. But a lot of the young composers ended up coming to Detroit for the final round. We would screen the submissions anonymously. There would be no names on the music. And there would be a committee that would choose what they felt would be the best pieces to be heard for a final round. Mm-hmm. The orchestra would then play the pieces in the final round. The composer would be there to give feedback. And then one piece would be chosen to be performed on the regular subscription concert, which is a major deal because at that point, our programs were being broadcast nationally and hosted by Dick Cavett.
Wow.
So it was a major thing. And we were the only orchestra in America doing that.
So you were actually one of the first of, say, the latter part of the 20th century to be doing that, because now all of a sudden everybody's grabbing people from all over the place to get them positions, which I think is wonderful. But anyway, you were the first, which is amazing. So I guess you met a lot of composers and instrumentalists, and I do know that you're a champion for singers as well. And so appreciative of that. So you were at Detroit, and then Dance Theater called?
Dance Theater of Harlem. Well, they called me again to conduct for their international tour to the Soviet Union. This was at the time, literally at the time that the Soviet Union and Russia was setting up for the Gorbachev-Reagan summit to talk about glasnost and perestroika to end the Soviet regime ultimately. And we performed in the Kremlin during that time.
But the request came from
Mr. Arthur Mitchell, who was the head of Dance Theater of Harlem.
Yeah, well, that was for you to come, to come. And I think one of the things about Mr. Mitchell, he wanted to let people know that everyone across the board was capable, professional, trained, etc. But the one thing I want to say about that request for the Dance Theater of Harlem was made by the Russian government, by Mr. Gorbachev. Is that correct? They specifically requested Dance Theater of Harlem over all the other companies in the United States to be part of this Glasnost, I guess it was called, this opening.
We
Now,
were cultural ambassadors for the relationship of opening between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Dance Theater of Harlem, isn't that amazing? And you were conducting. Now, you didn't take an orchestra with you. How was it
No.
working? How was it working with, how did you prepare to work with a Russian orchestra? Do you speak
I
Russian?
went Niet Yana Gabay Paruski.
Okay.
Gabay Ninoshka.
Da.
Da, pravda. But I flew over a week before. Now, you must remember that this is the time of very heavy Soviet control. Vladimir Putin was the head of the KGB. That gives you an idea. Judging from how he is now as president, imagine how he would have been as
There's
head
a name. Yeah.
of the secret government, the secret governmental police. But I went over a week before to rehearse, and I was assigned a translator to help me. And so it was very interesting. After a few days, I was able to go in and out of the Kremlin without having to be searched by security. And people who worked there were every day still searched by security. And so people working in the Kremlin would just stare at me. These are government officials. They would just stare at me. Why was I such a VIP? They called me Veep. But it was really kind of cool because one of the musicians at one point who spoke some English came to me and he said, Maestro, you must tell me. So in America, do all the black people speak Russian? And I said, well, why do you ask? He said, we had one conductor come before you. He was a black conductor and he spoke perfect Russian. All black people speak Russian in America, yes?
Da.
It was Isaiah Jackson who had majored in Russian at Harvard.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. What a story.
So
What a
it was
story.
hysterical. So I was there by myself though, and they did not have people travel by themselves. You stay in an intourist. Intourist means guest. You stay in a guest hotel for foreigners. I was staying in the hotel where they were setting up for the summit, a very Russian hotel. And Russians were not allowed in that hotel.
Wow.
Only dignitaries. And it's across the street from the Kremlin. So it was very high.
So tell me this. Did you do the Firebird in Russia?
Yes, we
Oh my
opened the
God.
Firebird.
Now
I
for
have to tell you.
oh,
Now,
but let me just
go
tell
on.
the people I am so if I ever win the lotto, I'm going to just write checks because I wish, hope, and pray that the Dance Theater of Harlem Firebird will be brought back. It is one of the costumes, the design, set design was by Jeffrey Holder.
Yes.
And it was just an amazing piece of work. But to imagine a predominantly African American company going to Russia and performing for the Russians their Firebird, what was that reception like, Leslie?
Well, as I said, we performed in the Kremlin, and the Palace of Congress, as it's called, holds an audience of 6,000. So it's a big place. And the curtain goes up, and there were gasps in the audience when the curtain went up. And there's no sound yet, just the curtain going up, because the scenery looks like a tropical rainforest with the flowers, the Venus flytrap, and the what do you call that other thing? The bird of paradise, all of these exotic flowers, the orchids going all over the place. The curtain, and then you hear you hear this very mysterious music, and the costumes are traditionally Russian, but the set is not, and so it has this otherworldly feeling to it. And our Firebird dancer's name at that point was Stephanie Dabney, who was
Oh,
the
yes.
ultimate Firebird. I saw them in Verona, and she literally wanted to jump off of a cliff to be the bird at one point. That's how daring she is. And when she danced, it was unbelievable. She literally looked like a bird.
I'm getting chills just remembering it.
And
Oh
at
my
the
gosh.
end, there was total silence. Total silence. The audience did not know how to react. They didn't know if they should be happy, sad, impressed, aghast. They had no idea how to react at that first performance. There was just total silence. And then ultimately, there was spontaneous, just ecstatic applause. But that moment of silence was kind of stunning because that had never happened. It's such a loud, grand, majestic ending. And the bird is still flitting all over the place. But it's very grand and majestic with the king and the queen and all of the court there. And they have beautiful costumes that are, they look very regal and royal from Russia. So it's very, very glamorous. Total silence.
What an experience. What an experience. So then you worked with Dance Theater of Harlem for a number of years.
I worked with them for 8 years, yes.
But you also work with the New York Philharmonic.
I worked with
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. When I was with the Detroit Symphony, our then executive director was Deborah Borda, she went from Detroit to New York, then from New York to LA, and then from LA back to New York. So she is once again with the New York Philharmonic. But she called me into her office one day in Detroit and said, Leslie, Kurt Masur is looking for a young conductor to take over as assistant for the one that's leaving. And the audition is on a specific date. And I said, I can't do it. I'm engaged for a tour. And she said, Leslie, this will never come up again. It is in your best interest to cancel whatever you're doing and do this audition. And I'm thinking, well, what are the chances of me getting a job with the New York Philharmonic, right? It's as likely as me getting a job with the Detroit Symphony or the Dance Theater of Harlem, both of which happened. But one does not learn quickly when one is dealing with what seems the impossible.
Yeah.
So I managed to do that, and I go to the audition, and there are, I think, maybe 6 conductors. And the first thing that Masur does is he asks for a volunteer to conduct the slow movement of a Bruckner symphony. Now, Bruckner is very difficult.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I like Bruckner, but only in small doses, okay?
It's very religious. It's very austere, especially the slow movements. And he asked for a slow movement volunteer, and no one is moving. So I volunteer. And I go up there, and I start conducting. And Maestro Masur was a very tall man, maybe 6'4", and I'm maybe 5'8" on a good day, 5'7" on a not so good day. We won't talk about bad days. But I feel this hand on my shoulder while I'm conducting the New York Philharmonic. And I hear this voice go, Leslie, it's too fast.
Wait a minute. So for the audition, they actually had the whole orchestra there?
Yes. Yes.
Now, let's back up for a second. When a conductor auditions, because usually for orchestral auditions for the instrumentalists, it's behind a screen for the first couple of rounds. And so
they have to see us.
Yeah. So they have to see you from behind or from
they have to see us as we would be if we were working.
So where does the panel sit? Do they sit behind the orchestra or they sit in the audience in the house?
I have no idea. I have no idea whatsoever because I never saw a panelist. I was never introduced to a panelist. We all, the conductors, sat in the auditorium. The New York Philharmonic was on stage. Maestro Masur was in the auditorium until I felt that hand on my shoulder, at which point he was on stage. And then he stopped me. And then someone else conducted, and then I was called back to conduct Egmont's, beginning of Egmont Overture. And it has a transition to a fast section that's awkward to do. And then it goes in a tempo that's very quick, that does not line up with the conductor until a certain point where it all crashes. And I can feel that they're not with me. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what do I do? It's gonna be really embarrassing. And this is gonna be a major train wreck. What do I do? I don't know how I managed. Somehow God was with me. And I heard bang, ba 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 bing, ba 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 bing, ba 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 bing. And I thought, hallelujah. And I stop and I go down and we are excused, for lunch. And we are supposed to come back after lunch. But just before we left for lunch, the manager came in and said, Maestro has made his decisions. Now, half the people haven't even conducted yet.
Ooh.
Maestro has made his decisions. You may all leave. I would like to speak to the following 2 people. And I was one of those 2 people. And from that moment on, I was hired.
Wow.
They never finished looking at the other candidates.
Now, you went on tour with them to Europe, if I recall.
Yes, it was a 10-city tour, which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And he
Eh,
asked me to conduct and rehearse in Paris for the opening concert, which was also
Oh.
quite a surprise.
Well, tell us the difference between an assistant conductor and an associate conductor.
The difference would be like the difference in academia between an assistant professor and associate professor. It shows a difference of experience level. And then a resident conductor would be like a professor. And the music director would be like a distinguished professor.
And then you have people who work in education departments where we often find people of
Major
color kind of
departments, yeah.
marginalized. If
Right.
I'm um, here's another thing. You also had your own orchestras. One was in Canada.
Right. House.
So can you talk about that a little bit and that experience?
Well, all of my experiences have been unusual. What can I say? I
Oh,
remember.
Canada.
Well, conductor auditions for music director last anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. It's a long process with a lot of interviews, a lot of different conducting performances. With down in Virginia, I went on tour as part of my audition, a 3 week tour. But in Canada, I conducted, I think, two different concerts, two different kinds of concerts.
Mhm.
You meet with city leaders. You meet with the head of the publication, whatever the major newspaper is. You meet with the board of directors. You meet with the board of governors, and you usually meet with whomever are part of the civic, like the head, if they have a bar association or a medical association, if there's a major philanthropic donor
Okay,
who's,
I'm confused.
these are
Okay.
people you meet with.
Break this down for me. Why, if you are working with the orchestra, and I'm sure there's some other people who have this question as well, why do you have to meet all these people? I mean, what's the purpose of it?
Because when um, in virtually every city, there is one major orchestra. Think of it this way. So in New York, it's the New York Philharmonic. In Boston, it's the Boston Symphony. Chicago, it's the Chicago Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
When that orchestra, when that organization hires that one person who is going to be at the helm, that one person represents every aspect of the organization in every manner. So you have to be able to be conversant with every aspect of society,
Mm-hmm.
from the musicians to potentially the governor or president. As I've met with governors, I've met with mayors.
Mm-hmm.
Overseas, I met with Mandela. I met with
Oh, that must have been
Princess
exciting.
Diana after a command performance. Rasia Gorbachev. So I met with President de Klerk before before he was president. Blacks didn't yet have the vote, and I had already had my conversations with F.W. de Klerk. I was
Mm-hmm.
appointed to speak to one of the commissions when Mandela became president to talk about the arts in South Africa. So one has to be very conversant. Speaking with ambassadors, state representatives is a normal part of your job. And so every constituent group wants to know what you're going to be like. You must be a master. One of my flutists in Halifax, when we were having a dispute, said, Maestro, you are a master of diplomacy. I work for a law firm, and I've never seen anybody who handle themselves with quite the sort of distinguished smoothness that you do with each of the representative parties.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to be purely non committed to all sides while being committed to all sides. So
To
it is
serve the
very
art.
no to serve the organization.
Ah, okay. So Halifax, um, Annapolis, and then you went back
Ballet,
overseas. Where was the other place? I'm sorry.
Joffrey Ballet in Chicago. That's what
Joffrey
Chicago,
Ballet.
Chicago.
Yes.
And then my South Shore Opera Company in Chicago.
And the thing is that in the midst of all of this, um, there didn't you go to Estonia once and you
I
learned some
went to Estonia a few times to guest
and
conduct, yes.
but I remember you mentioning that you were studying Estonian.
A little bit. I try to learn a little bit of every language of every country where I conduct so that people with whom I am going to work feel that I am showing them respect. Same
That's a
thing with
wonderful
other
thing.
countries.
Hmm. Can you talk about your experience in South Africa? Because I remember you um, there was an opera that went to Sweden, but it was in Zulu.
Norway. It was, yes, Norway. It went to Norway to we were the last performance in the old opera house. They were building the new opera house at the time that we went to Oslo to perform. The opera is called Princess Magogo, and the composer is Mzilikazi Kumalo, which is a mouthful.
Kumalo.
Mzilikazi is his first name.
Mzilikazi.
MZ is how his name starts. Mzilikazi.
Mzilikazi.
Kumalo. Yes. So his full name is, if you're talking in South Africa to someone, you would say, yes, and I was speaking with Mzilikazi Kumalo, and he was saying, and they would know that you were comfortable with what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Learning names of singers was a really hard one for me to learn.
There's a woman.
That's why one studies language.
And it's true. And there is a woman named Martha Redbone who is Afro-Indigenous American, and she said, and I totally agree with this: if we can learn how to say Tchaikovsky, we can learn how to say the other names as well. Mm-hmm. It may take a little time because our ears aren't oriented to it, but you learn.
They said, they were very specific. Tchaikovsky. No. In Russia, Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky.
You need the Kosa.
Kosa.
Kosa. Kosa.
Kosa.
Kosa. The kids used to follow me around and go, Kosa.
Kosa. Kosa. I'll work on it if I ever get a chance to go to South Africa.
When I was working in Cape Town, the language is Xhosa, not Zulu.
So, since we're talking about the continent, you have so many stories. In addition to working as a musician in South Africa, I want you to talk a little bit more about that. Then we're going to talk about your volunteer work.
Okay. That's also interesting and different.
Yeah. And very different.
Depending on whether I'm on the continent of Africa or the continent of North America, it's very different.
Yeah. So in South Africa, you were with in Johannesburg with the opera, but you first went with Dance Theater of Harlem.
I went with Dance Theater of Harlem in 1992 for the very first time, once again as a cultural ambassador. Nelson Mandela was out of prison for 2 years. There was a theater that had been having a lot of demonstrations, riots, we would call them, because Blacks had not been allowed to perform. And so the theater closed because of riots. We were sent there, we went as a guest to reopen the theater.
Who sent you there? U.S. State Department?
Yes. And so we went as guests, and there was a close association with the American Embassy in Pretoria. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of receptions that I went to and a lot of personal events, private events that I went to in terms of the government. And that ultimately led the next year when I went back to speaking with F.W. de Klerk, who was president of the country. But before that, I had met with the administrator, which is the equivalent of a governor, at one of the meetings, and the heads of the papers, all of the heads of finance, the heads of the insurance companies. And that meeting was to talk about what those people, the Africans, as opposed to the South Africans are Black. South Africans are white. This is back in the 90s now, right after the
I'm cringing a little bit, but go ahead.
The talk was to discuss how to solve the problem of those people now having more representation. And this is talk before them getting the vote.
And so so they're asking you as an American to weigh in on this conversation. That's kind of mad,
I am sitting there incredulous.
As the British say, that's kind of mad.
Because I am a European as far as they're concerned, which is higher even than being an American because I'm there with a European art form. And so they're all talking about this problem. It's kind of like literally talking about the race problem. And then they turn to me and say, you understand what we're saying, right? And I'm thinking, what part of my skin do you not see?
How did you respond, Leslie? I'm curious.
My response was, no, I don't see. I don't think you're understanding what the situation is and why people are responding the way they are responding. Mm-hmm. It is equivalent to what the United States had in the 1960s. And you see how that transpired into people of color having more rights and more visibility. that's what you want to have happen here. It does not negate what you as because the white population is a minority there. It does
Yeah.
not negate what you as a minority have done or your contributions to the society at large. But you must recognize the contributions of the 80% majority of the people here.
And give them their land back.
Well,
Sorry.
that was a conversation that we were not having yet. But that was my introduction to South Africa. And I've been back, I think, 75 times since then.
Wow. I've only been to the continent once.
Yeah, well, I would go at least twice a year for a while and sometimes 3 times a year. There were years I worked more in South Africa than I worked in America.
Well, we are citizens of the world in a way. I remember Jessie Norman, something she said one day just clarified it for me. Because as I said, and honestly, people, I could not get arrested in the United States. Couldn't get a singing job. This man here was the only one who was hiring me. Dance Theater of Harlem hired me. Opera Ebony, which we'll talk about another session, would hire me. But City Opera, which was my absolute goal career-wise, would not hire me. Jessie Norman said, they were asking her something about, race and whatnot. She says, I go where they hire me. And if South Africa was the place, great. If Italy was the place, great. But what an opportunity to work with up and coming singers. And they even right now, I think it's today or maybe it was yesterday, they're having a national voice competition, which is on Zoom. So they have all these young South African singers. Now, when I say South African, it's inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful voices.
Incredible.
Pretty Indy is just one of many. And what a lovely person she is as well. But I want you to talk about, you guys. You're going to have to go online and look up all of his resume and look up the awards that he's won, keys to the city, all of this. But Leslie also has a very philanthropic vein, and he does volunteer work. So, Leslie, could you talk about your volunteer work just briefly and tell us about that?
Well, I will start with the small part in the United States, which is working with 10,000 villages, which believes in fair trade for countries that are marginalized or developing nations, they're sometimes called. They have to have a GDP, a gross domestic product, that's below a certain amount so that we as a promoter of artisans who are creating products can bring up the level of the standard of living for the people working in communities. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
work with individual artists, we work with groups that will include more and more people in their communities and train them to create these trade products so that the entire area becomes enriched. That's one of the things that I felt very, very passionate about. And the one that opened near where I lived in Oak Park, I actually was the brainchild for that one to be created. On the continent, meaning Africa, I started working. My first project was with the shark cage diving boat.
Oh God! All right, people. This man used to send me photographs. I was like, "Oh, please, please be careful. Please be careful." You have to tell him about it because I'm gonna have to just.
Well, the worst they could do is bite you on the butt, for the most part,
Uh huh.
because the back of the cage is open. But it is an organization. I worked with what's called Great White Shark Projects, PROJECTX. And what they do is they research the habits of great white sharks in the Cape region between Cape Town and the end of the Horn, Cape Horn, and where the three oceans meet, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Indian, because it's very turbulent waters and the sharks congregate to that area. And we don't know much about what great whites do because we have not seen them in great numbers.
Leslie,
So
I'm
we
going to
go
tell you.
down in cages.
Wait. I'm going to tell you what great whites do. They eat.
But they don't eat people by and large because we are not attractive to them. We do not have a high enough fat content in our bodies for them to be interested. They want something like a walrus that they would like because it has a lot of blubber. We don't have that. So if there is a bite on a human, usually it's because a human is at the surface moving on a surfboard, for example, and they look like they are an animal. And so the sharks go, you know how dogs sniff people?
Yes.
Sharks bite items to find out what it is.
They just take a taste.
They take a little, it's not even a taste. They bite it to see what texture, what sort of feeling. It's not even so much to get a taste, just to find out what this thing is.
Okay, now listen. So you're down underwater. You're underwater in the cage.
Yes.
So what do you
come around? We attract the sharks with chum, which is a mixture of water, seawater, oil, fish oil, and chopped up tuna, which we do every morning. And then it's made into this stuff that looks like you've just puked. That's put in the water, and it attracts the sharks because they can smell blood from a mile or two away. And then we follow the habits of the sharks, how they circle about, if they breach, which is called breaching when they come out of the water, how they go back. And we also monitor marks on the animals so that we can see whether they're returning sharks or new sharks.
They have like tattoos, like fingerprints or something?
Well, animals,
they have marks.
They fight, they have marks. And so you actually do start. Ike was our biggest. Ike was a 19-footer that came around every day.
Oh my God.
Because the cage was 15 feet and Ike was, when passing the cage, bigger than the cage by about 2 feet on each side.
Would Ike look at you like with one eye as he was going by?
No. You would only see the eye if the shark breached. Now, when you're under the water, you can see the eye. And yes, then the eye will look at you in the cage. One day, all of us workers were down there volunteering in the cage. And Ike circled around a few times. And then the last time, you know how a kid will take a stick along a picket fence and go with the stick? Well, that's what Ike did with its fin that day. Mm. And we shot up because the sound underwater is enormously loud. And the person who trained us said, and that's why you tell all of the people who were guests to not put their fingers on the front of the cage, to only hold from the top, because there's not enough water at the top for the shark to be on top, unless it's lying on top of the cage, which it can also do, and then jump back into the water. They can jump into the boat. They can jump into the boat, but they usually don't. Okay,
well, Leslie, that sounds like a lot of fun. You also told me about...
Oh, yeah, it was great.
Oh, God.
With lions in Zimbabwe was also nice.
Yeah, I want you to tell me about that time you went walking at night in the Namibian desert.
Oh, gosh.
Tell that story.
That was a mistake. It was about 4:30 in the morning. I was supposed to be working on a project with cheetahs, but it ended up not working out, and so I just went on different safaris. And I was on a desert safari, and I needed to go to the bathroom. I woke up in the middle of the night, and they have latrines, and I remembered where the latrine was. I had no problem finding the latrine, and I thought I could find my way back by stargazing, because I don't have a good sense of direction. I got lost. And I don't know how long I was walking out there, and it reached a point where, because I saw no fences, I didn't know if I was inside the park or outside the park. But I know at this one point, this animal started walking towards me. And my heart, it's dark, so you don't see it at first until you see the eyes being reflected, if there's moonlight, right?
Yeah.
I just remember starlight. I don't remember moonlight. And I think that's why I got lost. Anyway, so I'm walking, and it's kind of like, imagine if you're walking and a St. Bernard happens to cross your way. It's big, and I just stopped and looked at it, and then it stopped and looked at me. And then it started walking in the direction it was going, so I started walking in the direction I was going, and I turned around so that I could see it, and it turned around so that it could see me, and I just walked backwards the way I was going. You don't want a wild animal at your back, because your back is an invitation for attack. So I kept walking backwards until I could no longer see it. And then I turned around and walked a little bit quicker. One does not run because one does not know what other animals are around.
Yeah.
If you run, you die.
Well, did it look like a hyena or a lion or what?
It was a jackal. So it was not too bad.
It's a big cat, though.
It's a big cat. I had a coyote on my back porch in Chicago.
Oh, God, please. So this is the kind of things Maestro does in his spare time.
Now, before leaving that is the environmental side. On the humanitarian side, I worked in a home for the aged in South Africa, and I worked in an orphanage in Morocco with people who have severe physical limitations. They can move only their eyes. That's severe. And it makes you humble when you see in their eye gratitude or joy, because you can really see all of those expressions and emotions, but it makes you humble for the people who choose to do the work as a profession. And my heart goes out to those people. And I have the greatest admiration. Like when I was in South Africa, I did one day where I went in one of the inner townships. I held what I called a spa day for the ladies who were the nurses, because they don't get days off, essentially. And so I said, okay, this afternoon you're gonna just come in and we're gonna do hair and makeup. And they're looking at me like I'm a crazy fool, right?
Like, who is this guy?
What do I know about hair and makeup? But they come in with their towels and their kits, and it's like nothing is happening. And I said, no, come on, take them out, take them out, take them out. They sort of speak English. And so I said, let's do some of the brushing, and let's put on some rouge, and let's put on some mascara and some eyeliner, and then let's do the lipstick, and take out your brushes and combs, and let's do the hair, and let's put in some braids, let's put in some cornrows. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, they're all giggling and laughing. And I said, now we're going to do our gym exercises. Take your towels, we're going to the floor, and they're looking at me like, what? And I said, I told you to wear pants, didn't I? You have on a skirt. You have to keep your legs closed while we're doing the exercises. And they're starting to laugh hysterically, just like you are. It ended up being a wonderful afternoon. They felt so rejuvenated.
And fun. Now, Leslie, now that you've brought it up, talk about your dancing, because I don't think many people know that you're a dancer as well.
Well, the kids are starting to talk about that here at Interlochen, because every now and again I try to demonstrate something that a dancer will do, since we do ballets here. I studied African dance growing up, but when I was teaching at Carleton College, I started to study ballet. And as I started to work with more dance companies, I would take company class with the dancers. So I won't say that I became proficient, but I became physically fit enough that when I was on tour in Russia, which was only a year that I had been working with dance theater, I had been mistaken by one of the people who worked in the administration with dance theater. I was mistaken for a dancer, which I thought was very funny. But I did learn how to do everything that they were doing.
Well, and you know why that's important, people? Because when you're conducting for dance, and we're going to talk about opera in a minute, and Trilogy Opera and Central Park 5, when you're conducting for performers, if you don't know the process that they go through to do what it is that they do, whether they're singing or dancing or acting, say you're doing incidental music, then you can't really be with them when you're conducting an orchestra. And I'm going to speak from my personal experience right now. Okay, I'm biased, but when you work with Maestro Dunner, he is there for you as a support. There's no fight there. You don't have to worry that he's going to not give you the right tempo, because he's going to give you the tempo that's appropriate for you as an individual performer.
That's the goal.
And I heard him say this working with what was it, the Midsummer Night's Dream that you did with the New York City Ballet, right? I'm going to talk about you now. Can I talk about you?
Okay. Should I leave the room?
Yeah, you can leave the room. So he did not have an orchestra rehearsal for the performance. He had a brief rehearsal, I guess it was 2 hours or so, with the principals, but he met the full company and the orchestra and the I think they had like a small chorus the night of the performance. I was there.
At the performance.
At the performance, I'm saying,
yeah.
Like with the downbeat.
Right.
I was there, and it was fabulous. And it says it's a testament to his ability as a conductor and a musician, and cool, calm, and collected. Okay, so now you can talk.
Let me tell you, because of that performance, they hired me to do Nutcracker, and in my first Nutcracker, I had a short meeting with their rehearsal pianist to talk about tempos that would be appropriate and the different cuts. And the insert, they put in music that is not traditionally from the Nutcracker that I didn't know. So I had to learn that rather quickly. But I remember when I walked into the pit that night and the door closed behind me, one walks first past the cellos. And I can't say the exact words. Maybe I can say them in another language. But what I heard as I passed by was, let's say, oh, heavens to Murgatroyd, there's a new conductor. It was a 4-letter word that starts with...
Oh, Scheiße, that's in German, yes. Merde in French, yes. Okay, all right.
Oh, poopies. And I go up to the podium and I see all of these faces, blank faces, staring at me as I give the downbeat. And I get through the ballet almost to the end. We reach the Sugar Plum Fairy in the second act. And I have a little thing that I like to do with the music, which doesn't always work with new people if they don't know you and if they don't know that you're there, because the principal dancer was not used to looking at the conductor because she had done it so many times with this company. Mm-hmm. And I did it slightly differently. And she turned to look to see what had happened. And the look on her face was priceless. It's like, oh!
Did she like it?
Huh?
Did she like it?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
All I can say is that there was a look of utter perplexment and being stunned, because there was a face, there was a body, there was a shape, there was a color that she had never seen before.
Well, there's something
in the middle of dancing.
Well, there's something to be said for spontaneity, but it also says there's something to be said for getting to the show early, before half an hour, to know what the heck is going on.
But let me tell you, I did it again in Detroit with dancers from the San Francisco Ballet, and it was at the same point, and I had a rehearsal with the orchestra, so they knew exactly what I wanted. And I was like, and I always go, yo, and the dancer turned and looked. And I did the second phrase, and just before I started the second time, her leg went, oh, you can't see my leg. Her leg went, for her to go,
oh, so she was ready that time. That's good.
Second one. And at the end of the performance, she came over to me. She said, that was very naughty.
Well, I have to say,
when she said it,
I have to say, and I remember this from dance theater, because I also work with dance theater, not as a dancer though, but Mr. Mitchell was adamant about the dancers being able to dance on the music and not counting. No matter what. So it was slower, faster, because you knew the score, you could gauge yourself. But one thing I will say again about Maestro Dunner is that he will gauge the music to you and how you produce it. So let's talk about opera. And then, my gosh, I always run over an hour. I just like talking. So let's talk about your operas. Let's talk about your operas, because the most recent thing that I saw on the boards was Central Park 5. But let's back up and talk about your work with Opera Ebony.
That's where it started. With you.
Really? I don't remember.
Harriet Tubman. Scenes from the life. Scenes from the life of a martyr.
Oh yes, that's right. Oh, that's a tell all your father's people, don't you weep for me. That's the one, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, one at a time, two at a time.
That's from Frederick Douglass.
I'm sorry, Frederick Douglass. You're right.
The Frederick Douglass.
And then we did Scenes of Life.
That's a Dorothy Rudmore. Yeah, right, yeah. There's some great music, but that one was by Lena McClin, right?
Lena McClin. Yeah, she's from
Chicago. Yeah. Well, folks, hey, stuff happens, and we can't remember everything because I didn't write anything down for this interview. But here we go. So, Opera Ebony. Let's talk about Opera Ebony, real. You were the resident conductor.
At one point, I was resident conductor. Opera Ebony did a lot for people of color. Let me say that very specifically, for people of color, giving us opportunities and venues in which to perform and display our talent and our art.
and to do not just contemporary opera but grand opera as well.
Right.
So they did a variety of things. So from there, you also you're with Trilogy Opera now. You've done Long Beach, South Africa, of
Right,
course.
South Africa. I've done my own opera company. I was supposed to conduct with Baltimore Opera, but they folded the season I was supposed to conduct.
Yeah, that was the Porgy and Bess.
That was a poor game.
But you have done so many. You've done grand opera, contemporary opera, some traditional operas. So
And
as an opera
Mozart in Italy.
conductor,
Yeah, I did Mozart in Italy.
I'm going to say this right now. You don't have to. You don't have to have any facial expression. As an opera conductor, San Francisco, Washington, Dallas, New Orleans, the Met should be calling you because you have the experience. You have not only the experience, but you're a hell of a good conductor. And so I'm going to put this out here right now. Anybody's listening, you need to call this man because he knows his stuff. He's not a dilettante. He's not a beginner. And that's what you need in your stage when you're doing a production with 100 people on stage. Okay, I said it. Now, moving on. Let's talk about Trilogy Opera because you have been working with them on their Wagner cycle, I think it is.
Yes, I just finished doing Götterdämmerung with them this past August, which was monumental.
Now, for those that don't know, Trilogy Opera is run by singer Kevin Maynor out in Newark, New
Right,
Jersey.
right.
And let me just back up and say companies like Opera Ebony, although they are there to help support artists of color, they're not totally exclusive like that. They have everybody, people on stage, backstage, working the scenes. We're going to do probably a session on Opera Ebony in a few weeks, just as a historic thing. But Kevin Maynor has been doing a Wagner cycle, and so he's done all of the Ring now, right?
Complete, yes.
Yeah.
He has split it between two conductors. They have a music director named Julius Williams who did the first two operas of the Ring, and I did the second two operas of the Ring. Next time the entire Ring is mounted, we will swap so that there will be two Black conductors on Earth who have done all of the Ring. How about that?
That's amazing. And the thing is that of course, it's a small company, but they do a lot. They know how to make bricks without straw, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so Leslie has an ongoing relationship with that company. Let's talk about Central Park Five. What was that experience like,
Central
especially in the
Park
time of now?
especially in the time of Trump.
Well,
That's how I want to put it.
Yeah.
Because Central Park 5 was the beginning of the life of Trump in the public eye, not as a real estate builder. I don't want to say mogul because he was never a mogul. He never will be a mogul. But
I got a story there. Go ahead.
in 1989, Donald Trump took out articles in 4 newspapers in the front page, spent not tens of thousands of dollars to talk about how New York State should bring back the death penalty to execute these 5 young men who were between the ages of 14 and 15 at the time. At the time, they were 14 and 15, but they're young men, right? So they should be executed for the heinous crime that they had perpetrated. Now, years later, they have finally been exonerated because the person who had perpetrated the crime confessed, and it was only one person. And ironically, that one person happened to be in jail with one of the 5, and that's why that one person ended up confessing.
And they had DNA evidence that it
Right.
was this guy.
Right. But he felt guilty that this young man had been in prison for 13 years for something he had not done. And he was not supposed to be one of the ones who were even questioned.
This is the one who went with his friend.
This is the one who went with his friend, right. He went with his Corey. He went with Corey Wise. All he did was go with a friend who was 14 because the policeman said, well, are you going to come down with your friend? And he said, well, I guess I should because his mom will be mad if I don't. And he ends up in prison for 13 years because by the time the trial was held a year later, he was 16. And our government, our state government, our city government wanted to use this as an example of how one prosecutes to the fullest extent of the law, even when someone is a minor, to treat them as an adult. And then if you can imagine being in prison for rape and attempted murder, even if you're guilty, what the prison population will do to you.
Horrific.
Now imagine what they
Yeah.
do to you if you're a 16-year-old child. So he spent years in solitary confinement in order to maintain life.
Mm-hmm. And Anthony Davis picked up this story with his cousin Tulani Davis wrote the libretto, if I recall.
Richard Wesley.
Richard Wesley. Okay. So I think Trilogy actually did it
They commissioned
first.
the work.
Yeah.
Trilogy commissioned the work. It was called Five, and it included hip hop. The idea was that there was one central character played by Kevin Maynor, who was the district attorney, but also a commentator, an onlooker. The district attorney was white and the onlooker was black. And so Kevin Maynor's character was sort of like, if anybody has ever seen Thunderball, the 007 movie that had Jeffrey Holder in it, when he was down in Haiti as a voodoo head. He was half in whiteface and half in blackface. This character was the same and acted as a commentator, but also as the prosecutor. So having no opinion and having total opinion through observation. And then it was taken up by Long Beach Opera and it was tweaked some by Anthony Davis. It took out that element and it also took out the hip hop element and sort of developed a few of the other, the Donald Trump character. And that's why I say that this all revolves around Donald Trump. The character of Donald Trump is in the opera and is giving a central platform in the second half of the opera to speak this vehement garbage about wanting to reinstitute the death penalty against these young men. The music, I have to say, the music covers a lot of different aspects, and that's the genius of Anthony Davis, because he is so broadly based as a musician. He can have hip hop in there, he can have jazz in there, he can have counterculture in there, he can have classical symphonic in there, he can have all of that simultaneously in there.
Well, what I'm hoping that, because I missed it when it was in New Jersey, and of course I couldn't get out to California these days, but one of the things, there was a meeting down at Opera America. I'm in New York City. There was a meeting at Opera America with several composers, women composers, and Anthony Davis was there. And I was saying, I hope that there's some way we can hear recordings of this, that we can see the scores. Because one of the things about the connection between composers and conductors and singers is that if a singer is working with a composer or conductor and says, hey, I want you to, look at this piece of music, then that music gets promoted and gets heard, which raises the possibility of a piece being produced. That's my opinion. I have no scientific basis for that. But if you have people who are singing your music, disseminating your music, it's being heard in auditions or on concerts and whatnot, then the possibility of, say, getting a full performance is much greater than if you just, I'm going to write on this topic and hope somebody does it, because producing opera is really expensive.
So before you go from that, I want to say that I'm trying, in partnership with the University of Cincinnati Conservatory, to mount a portion of the opera next term.
Wonderful.
Because they are interested in having this discourse, but having the discourse around performance.
Yeah, they should invite some of the alumni back to talk about that too.
That's a good point. I will mention that.
See, when you get to a certain point in your life, people, the filter can come off, So let's talk about what's coming up for you, and then we're gonna wrap up real. Okay, so some of your future projects, this thing with Cincinnati, you're going to continue with Interlochen. Are there any travels in your future?
I have not been looking at traveling yet, although I want to try to form a partnership between Interlochen and the National Youth Orchestra of South Africa, so that we can begin a scholarship program for 2 students who are instrumentalists and 2 students who are vocalists, and then ultimately 2 students who are dancers, to have a regular partnership for them to come here to study.
That would be amazing.
Perhaps maybe some of our students could go there to play in their summer national orchestra. I am also trying to work with Tulsa to do something that I hope will be special. In June, if I can get the wherewithal, there is a piece by my favorite composer that's coming up. Adolphus Hailstork is working on a piece called A Knee on the Neck. We know what this piece is about just from the title. And
Yes.
I want to create a consortium world premiere for that piece. If I can, I would love for Tulsa to be invited because June will be the 100th anniversary of the Black Wall Street Massacre. And I think those two things need to happen simultaneously.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of work to do, a lot of art to be made, a lot of commentary for these times. And I just want to thank you, Leslie, for your time today. It's been always a joy talking to you. For those of you that are viewing, just know I've known Leslie for quite a while, and he is a dear friend, and I appreciate his willingness to sit down and chat with me today. So we want to thank everyone now for coming and sitting in with our conversation today. And Leslie, thank you so much. I wish you all the best, and I may stop by again to have another conversation with you about art and music.
That
So
would be
thank you,
fine.
everyone.
Thank
Okay.
you, Carolyn, for inviting me to join you today.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.